The courtroom in Cedar Hill was packed that morning. Rows of familiar faces from my own street filled the benches. Neighbors who had shared cookouts waved from porches and whispered about me behind curtains. Now, they weren't whispering. They were murmuring openly, leaning close to one another, smirking as if today was the day I would finally be erased. When I walked through the heavy wooden doors, I felt every eye turn toward me. And then, like a knife, Deborah Wallace's sharp voice sliced through the air. She leaned toward Martha Lewis, not even bothering to lower her tone. "She's pathetic. Just look at her. She thinks she belongs here." Laughter rippled through the benches, Paul Stevens shaking his head with that smug grin I had seen too many times across the hedges of our backyards. My cheeks burned, but I lifted my chin. Then it happened. Judge Marcus Ellery looked up from his stack of files. His eyes locked on me and his entire body stilled. For a heartbeat, it felt like even the ceiling fans froze mid-rotation. He leaned back slowly, his expression tightening with something between shock and awe. Then, almost in a whisper that carried farther than he intended, he breathed, "Is that her?" The gavel he had been holding slipped slightly in his hand. The clerk stopped typing. Even the bailiff shifted nervously. The laughter died instantly. A hush spread like wildfire through the courtroom. Deborah's smirk faltered. Paul's smug grin vanished. Every neighbor in that room stared at me with wide eyes, confusion replacing ridicule. They had spent months mocking me, dismissing me, trying to strip me of the very land beneath my feet. But in that moment, the truth began to bleed through the cracks. The quiet woman they thought powerless, me, Madison Clark, was the actual owner of the disputed land. And in my hands, I carried deeds that would not only prove it, but expose every single one of their lies. My story begins where most stories of this kind do, with inheritance. Not the kind that brings champagne toasts and celebratory dinners, but the quiet kind that comes with responsibility, and in my case, eventual conflict. My grandfather's property sat on the eastern edge of Cedar Hill, a town that prided itself on historical charm while eagerly chasing modern development. The 2-acre plot had been in our family since before the town incorporated, back when Cedar Hill was nothing but a cluster of mill houses and dirt roads. Land holds memory, my grandfather used to tell me as we walked the perimeter of his property. It remembers who truly cares for it. When he passed 5 years ago, the property came to me, his only grandchild who showed interest in preserving rather than selling. At 32, I was single, working remotely as a technical writer, and more than happy to move into the modest craftsman house nestled among ancient oaks. The first year passed peacefully. I restored the garden, replaced the roof, and established a quiet routine. Neighbors waved from a distance. I attended the occasional block party. My existence was pleasant but unremarkable, exactly how I preferred it. Then the Cedar Hill Community Development Plan was announced. "We're bringing Cedar Hill into the future," Mayor Thompson declared at the town meeting, "with a new community center, retail spaces, and modern housing that will increase property values across the board." The diagrams displayed that night showed a sleek complex built around a central plaza, positioned exactly where my grandfather's property stood. But the presentation labeled that land as pending acquisition, as if my home was merely a detail to be handled. After the meeting, Deborah Wallace approached me. With her perfectly highlighted hair and county council position, she was Cedar Hill's unofficial social gatekeeper. "Madison, we need to talk about your situation," she said, her voice coated with false concern. "That old house of your grandfather's, it's quite the eyesore now, isn't it? The town is prepared to make you a generous offer." I blinked at her. "I'm sorry, but I'm not selling." Her smile tightened. "Don't be hasty. Paul Stevens, you know Paul, the real estate developer? He's put together numbers that would benefit everyone. You could get a lovely condo in the new development." "Thank you, but no. That land isn't for our sale." Something flashed behind her eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I hadn't immediately capitulated. She patted my arm condescendingly. "Think about it, dear. Progress is inevitable. You don't want to be the one standing in its way." That conversation marked the beginning of the pressure. What started as polite suggestions soon became social isolation. Invitations to neighborhood events stopped. Friendly waves became curt nods. Children were called inside when I walked past. Paul Stevens, with his expensive suits and booming voice, began parking outside my house, making calls from his luxury car where I could see him. "Just considering the development potential," he would say when our paths crossed. "Shame to see good land wasted." Martha Lewis, who ran the local bakery and Cedar Hills rumor mill with equal efficiency, began her whisper campaign. Did you know she barely works? I overheard her telling a customer. Just living off her grandfather's money, and she's refusing to sell that land that would bring jobs to Cedar Hill. Selfish, if you ask me. I weathered these slights quietly, focusing on my work and tending to my garden. My grandfather had taught me that dignity doesn't need an audience. Then, 6 months after the development plan was announced, I found a letter in my mailbox. Not a friendly note, but a formal document from the Cedar Hill County Clerk's office, summoning me to court. The town was challenging my ownership of the property, claiming discrepancies in the deed transfer and suggesting my grandfather had actually promised the land to the town. Before his death, it was a lie, a complete fabrication, but it was a lie with powerful backers. That night, as rain pattered against my roof, I climbed into the attic and pulled out the old cedar chest my grandfather had instructed me never to part with. Family history, he'd called it. Inside were yellowed documents, faded photographs, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in his shaky handwriting. The letter inside read, "My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then someone has challenged your right to our land. I knew this day might come. Cedar Hill has always had ambitious people who mistake quietness for weakness. In this chest, you'll find every deed, survey, and contract related to our property, dating back to 1887. The land is yours, unquestionably and completely. But, more importantly, you'll find truth, the one thing no court can dismiss if properly presented. Madison, the world will always try to strip away what belongs to the quiet ones. Never forget, you are the rightful keeper of this land. Do not let them laugh you out of what is yours. Your strength is not in shouting, but in standing steady when they expect you to fall. With all my love and confidence, Grandpa William, I spread the documents across my dining room table. Property surveys, tax records, title transfers, all meticulously preserved. And as I studied them, I discovered something my grandfather had never mentioned. Our land wasn't just any parcel in Cedar Hill. It was the original town center, donated by my great-great-grandfather with specific provisions that it remain with the family, unless willingly sold. The truth was there in black and white, but would truth be enough against the power of progress and profit? Against neighbors who had already decided I didn't belong? The court date was set for 3 weeks later. As I filed the documents back into the chest, I realized this wasn't just about keeping my home. It was about honoring my grandfather's faith in me, and perhaps, finally finding my voice. The weeks before the hearing transformed Cedar Hill into a battleground of whispers. I felt it everywhere, at the grocery store, the post office, even during my morning walks. Conversations would halt when I approached, only to resume with heightened intensity once I passed. Did you hear she's fighting the development? Martha Lewis's voice carried from behind the counter of her bakery as I entered one Tuesday morning. She didn't bother lowering her voice when she spotted me. The audacity, honestly, as if she has any real claim to that land. I ordered my usual coffee and blueberry muffin, pretending I hadn't heard. Martha slid them across the counter without meeting my eyes. That'll be $7.50, she said flatly. Up 50 cents from last week. Price increase? Asked. Everything costs more these days, she replied, her meaning clear. My presence in Cedar Hill was becoming increasingly expensive for everyone. I paid and left, taking the long way home to avoid walking past the community bulletin board, where I'd seen flyers about an emergency town meeting regarding obstacles to community progress. At home, I threw myself into preparation, organizing documents chronologically, researching property law, and rehearsing what I would say in court. But the isolation was beginning to wear on me. My phone rarely rang. Emails from local friends gradually stopped. I was becoming Cedar Hill's pariah. Then came the notes. Small white cards left in my mailbox, slipped under my door, or tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Don't be selfish. Your grandfather would want progress. No one stays where they're not wanted. I collected each one, tucking them into a folder. Evidence of harassment, my logical mind said, though I knew Cedar Hill's social hierarchy would ensure these notes remained anonymous. One evening, as sunset painted my kitchen in amber light, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Paul Stevens on my porch, his cologne, announcing his presence before I even saw him. Madison, he said, flashing the smile that had graced Cedar Hill's Business Leader of the Year posters 3 years running. I think we got off on the wrong foot. Did we? I asked, not inviting him in. Look, I understand family sentiment, I do. But sentiment doesn't pay property taxes or fix leaky roofs. He gestured to my home's weathered exterior. I've come with a final offer, 20% above market value, plus a guaranteed unit in the new development. Prime location, all fees waived. That's generous, I acknowledged. But as I've said repeatedly, I'm not selling. His friendly facade cracked slightly. You know, Madison, fighting the entire town isn't going to end well for you. The court case, it's just a formality. The development is happening. Deborah has the council's backing. The mayor's on board. Then I guess I'll see everyone in court, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Paul's expression hardened. This isn't just about a house, Madison. It's about being a good neighbor, a good citizen. Your grandfather understood community. Do you really think he'd want you living here alone? With everyone? Against you? The mention of my grandfather ignited something in me. My grandfather, I said carefully, taught me that community isn't built by bulldozing history. Good night, Mr. Stevens. I closed the door, listening to his heavy footsteps retreat down my porch steps, followed by the slam of his car door. Through my living room window, I watched his taillights disappear down the street. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Paul had said. Was I being stubborn? Was I truly standing in the way of something beneficial for Cedar Hill? At 3 a.m., I padded downstairs and spread my grandfather's documents across the dining table once more. In the glow of my single lamp, I noticed something I'd overlooked before. A map of the original town layout from 1887, with my family's land clearly marked as Clark Commons, with a notation, for public use, under Clark family stewardship. I traced the faded ink with my finger, understanding dawning. This wasn't just private property. It was land my family had always intended for community use, but under our guidance not to be sold for commercial development. The next morning, I called the one person in Cedar Hill who might still speak to me, Eleanor Hayes, the town librarian and local historian. At 78, Eleanor cared more about historical accuracy than social politics. Eleanor, I need your help researching something about Cedar Hill's founding, I said when she answered. This about your court case? She asked bluntly. Yes, she sighed heavily. Madison, half the town's breathing down my neck about this. Deborah Wallace personally came to remind me about the library's funding coming up for review. My heart sank. I understand if you can't— Oh, hush, she interrupted. I've outlasted 3 mayors and 2 attempts to digitize the card catalog. Deborah Wallace doesn't scare me. Come by after hours. Use the back door. That evening, Eleanor unlocked the library archives for me, a room smelling of old paper and preservation chemicals. For hours, we pored over town records, land surveys, and meeting minutes. Well, I'll be damned, Eleanor muttered sometime after midnight, pushing a brittle newspaper toward me. Look at this, 1922 Cedar Hill Gazette. The headline read, Clark family reaffirms land trust for town benefit. The article detailed how my great-grandfather had established a unique arrangement. The land would remain privately owned by the Clark family, but would always be made available for community events, gatherings, and green space. In exchange, the town had agreed never to levy property taxes on the parcel, an agreement that explained why my grandfather's property tax bill had always been surprisingly low. This changes everything, I whispered. Maybe, Eleanor said, cautiously. But Madison, you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't just about land anymore. It's about Deborah proving she can deliver this development to enhance her political prospects. It's about Paul's company securing a multi-million-dollar contract. It's about Martha and the others following whoever they think has power. I gathered the photocopies we'd made. Thank you, Eleanor. Truly. She patted my hand. Your grandfather was a good man. Stubborn as hell, but good. I see him in you. Her eyes crinkled with concern. Be careful, dear. Truth doesn't always win in the short term. As I drove home that night, I noticed a crowd gathered at Deborah Wallace's house. Cars lining both sides of the street, lights blazing from every window. Through the large bay window, I could see Paul Stevens gesturing animatedly, Deborah nodding, and other neighbors leaning forward in their seats. They were planning their final strategy, their courtroom ambush. Little did they know, I was planning mine too. But mine would be built on something they had forgotten existed in their rush for progress, historical truth. The weekend before the hearing, an unexpected name appeared on my caller ID, Judge Marcus Ellery's clerk, requesting a private meeting. My stomach tightened as I agreed to meet at the courthouse Monday morning. The county courthouse stood in stark contrast to Cedar Hill's quaint downtown, a modern glass and steel structure, cold and imposing. I arrived early, clutching a folder of documents like a shield. "Miss Clark?" A young woman in a tailored suit approached. "I'm Lisa Briggs, Judge Ellery's clerk. Please follow me." She led me through security and up to a conference room where Judge Ellery waited. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 50, with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. He rose when I entered. "Ms. Clark, thank you for coming. Please understand that this meeting is unusual. I should recuse myself from your case." My heart sank. "May I ask why, Your Honor?" He removed his glasses. "Because I believe we've met before, though you may not remember it. 15 years ago, Georgetown University Law Library." I stared at him, memories slowly crystallizing. I had worked nights at the law library during my undergraduate years. "You were a visiting professor," I said slowly. "There was some controversy." He nodded grimly. "False plagiarism accusations that nearly destroyed my career. You were the student assistant who provided the time-stamped records proving I couldn't have copied the work in question." The memory flooded back. A distraught professor, malicious colleagues, and me, quietly pulling digital records that exonerated him. "I never properly thanked you," he continued. "By the time the matter was resolved, you had graduated. Your intervention saved my career." I sat stunned, the coincidence almost too perfect. "Judge Ellery, Cedar Hill is a small town, but surely there's another judge who could—" "There is," he interrupted. "And I'll step aside if you wish. But first, I want to be transparent about something. This case has attracted unusual attention. The mayor called me personally, so did Councilwoman Wallace." My blood chilled. "They pressured you?" "Let's say they expressed strong community interest in the outcome." His expression hardened. "I don't appreciate such approaches. If I remain on your case, Ms. Clark, I can promise complete impartiality, nothing more, nothing less. The evidence will determine my ruling." I considered my options. A new judge might be less entangled, but also potentially more susceptible to Cedar Hill's power players. "I would prefer you remain on the case, Your Honor," I decided. "And I don't expect special treatment, just fairness." He nodded. "Then I'll see you tomorrow in court. And Ms. Clark, bring everything you have. You'll need it." Walking out of the courthouse, I noticed Deborah Wallace's silver Mercedes parked across the street. She sat behind the wheel, watching me, her expression unreadable. I nodded slightly in acknowledgement. She didn't respond, simply started her engine and drove away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my grandfather's house, my house, touching the worn banister, the door frames marked with generations of height measurements, the window seats where I'd read books as a child during summer visits. Near midnight, headlights swept across my living room wall. A car had pulled into my driveway. I peered through the curtains to see Eleanor's ancient Volvo. She emerged carrying a cardboard box. "Sorry for the late hour," she said when I opened the door, "but I found something you need to see before tomorrow." On my dining table, she laid out black and white photographs from what appeared to be the 1960s. "These were misfiled in the town festival archives," she explained. "Look at this one." The photograph showed a community picnic. In the background stood a younger version of my grandfather beside a distinguished-looking man in a suit. "That's Mayor Wallace," Eleanor pointed. "Deborah's father. They were friends once, good friends. This was taken just before the highway proposal. That would have cut through Cedar Hill." "I don't understand the significance," I admitted. Eleanor pushed another photograph forward, this one showing a town meeting, people standing and shouting. The town was divided. The highway meant money, jobs, progress, but it would have destroyed the historic district. "What happened?" "Your grandfather happened." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "William Clark quietly donated 15 acres of his other land holdings, property outside town that he'd inherited from his father, to create an alternative route for the highway. Saved the town, saved its character. That's why they made him Grand Marshal of the town parade that year." She pointed to another photograph, my grandfather in a convertible, waving, a banner reading Cedar Hill's savior draped across him, the car door. "So why would Deborah work against me now if her father and my grandfather were friends?" I asked. Eleanor's expression darkened. "Because Richard Wallace, Deborah's father, wanted to take credit for the highway solution. But your grandfather insisted the donation remain anonymous. When the truth eventually came out, Richard's political aspirations collapsed. He never forgave William, and Deborah inherited that grudge," I whispered. Old wounds run deep in small towns, Eleanor confirmed. This fight isn't just about development. For Deborah, it's about family vindication. After Eleanor left, I sat among the scattered photographs and documents, the full weight of tomorrow's hearing pressing down on me. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the culmination of decades of Cedar Hill history, of personal vendettas and family legacies. I was no longer fighting just for my home. I was fighting for my grandfather's reputation, for historical truth, and for what Cedar Hill could be, versus what Deborah and her allies wanted to transform it into. Morning arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully in a simple navy dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings my only adornment. I packed every document into my grandfather's old briefcase and drove to the courthouse, the rising sun casting long shadows across Cedar Hill's streets. In the parking lot, I sat watching people arrive, Deborah and Paul together, both in expensive suits, Martha Lewis shepherding a group of neighbors, Mayor Thompson with his administrative assistant. They moved as a unified front, confident in their numbers and influence. I took a deep breath, remembering my grandfather's words. Your strength is not in shouting, but in standing steady when they expect you to fall. With documents in hand and truth as my only ally, I walked toward the courthouse doors, ready to face the storm. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Ellery entered. He surveyed the room, packed with Cedar Hill residents, most aligned against me, before addressing the court. This case concerns property rights and alleged deed discrepancies regarding the Clark property on Maple Street, the town of Cedar Hill versus Madison Clark. He looked directly at me. Ms. Clark, I understand you're representing yourself. Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Very well. The town will, present its case first. Cedar Hill's attorney, James Reynolds, approached the bench with the confident stride of someone accustomed to winning. For 40 minutes, he presented a seemingly compelling case. Outdated surveys, ambiguous language in my grandfather's will, and testimony from the town clerk suggesting my grandfather had discussed returning the land to the community. Deborah Wallace took the stand, her testimony a masterclass in careful manipulation. William Clark loved Cedar Hill, she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion. He often told my father he wanted his land to benefit the town after his passing. We're simply trying to honor his wishes while bringing much-needed economic development to our community. Paul Stevens testified next about property values and the revitalization opportunity the development represented. Martha followed with emotional appeals about community needs and how my obstruction was dividing neighbors. Throughout their testimonies, I noted the inconsistencies, the carefully worded phrases, the absence of concrete evidence. They had built their case on implications and hearsay, counting on community pressure to fill the gaps. When Reynolds concluded, Judge Ellery turned to me. Ms. Clark, your response? I approached the podium, acutely aware of every eye in the room. Your Honor, I'll be brief and direct. The town's case rests on suggestions and implications, not documented facts. I have those facts. I presented the original deed from 1887, the newspaper article about the Clark family land trust, tax records showing the special arrangement between my family and Cedar Hill, and finally my grandfather's notarized letter to me. This land has never been promised to the town for development, I explained. It was established as a trust under Clark family stewardship, available for community use while remaining privately owned. My grandfather maintained this tradition throughout his life. Then I revealed what Eleanor had discovered. Furthermore, this isn't the first time Cedar Hill has faced a development crossroads. In 1967, when the interstate highway threatened to divide our town, my grandfather donated 15 acres of his other holdings to create an alternative route. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. I displayed the photographs Eleanor had found, including one of Richard Wallace and my grandfather shaking hands at the parade. The Clark family has consistently acted in Cedar Hill's best interest, I continued, but always with the understanding that the Maple Street property would remain in our family, under our stewardship. I turned to face the crowded benches. I'm not opposed to community progress, but I am opposed to distorting my grandfather's legacy and ignoring legal property rights for commercial gain disguised as public benefit. Judge Ellery studied me over his reading glasses. Ms. Clark, these documents appear significant, but Mr. Reynolds should have the opportunity to review them. Of course, I agreed. I've prepared copies for the court and counsel. As I distributed the packets, I caught Deborah's expression, a mixture of shock and growing anger. Paul Stevens was frantically whispering to Reynolds, while Martha looked genuinely confused. After a brief recess for document review, Reynolds attempted to discredit my evidence, suggesting the old newspaper articles might be misinterpreted and questioning the authenticity of the notarized letter. Judge Ellery interrupted him. Mr. Reynolds, are you formally challenging the authenticity of these, documents? Reynolds hesitated, glancing at Deborah, who gave a slight shake of her head. No, Your Honor, but we question their relevance to current zoning and development needs. Their relevance, Judge Ellery replied dryly, is that they directly address the question of ownership and intent, which is the core of this case. He turned to me. Ms. Clark, do you have anything further to add? I stood again. Just this, Your Honor. I understand Cedar Hill needs growth and development. I'm willing to work with the town to make portions of the land available for community use, a park perhaps, or community gardens. But I cannot and will not surrender my grandfather's legacy to commercial development that would erase our family's connection to this place. Judge Ellery nodded thoughtfully. I believe I have sufficient information to rule. He adjusted his glasses and addressed the courtroom. Based on the evidence presented, I find no legitimate basis for the town's claim against Ms. Clark's ownership. The property at 422 Maple Street legally belongs to Madison Clark, as properly transferred in William Clark's will. Relief flooded through me, but Judge Ellery wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice sharpening, I find the town's case troublingly deficient in factual basis. The suggestion that William Clark intended to transfer this land to the town is contradicted by substantial documentary evidence. At minimum, this represents careless legal work. His gaze swept over Deborah and Paul. At worst, it suggests a deliberate attempt to use legal proceedings to pressure a private citizen into relinquishing rightful property. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Judge Ellery closed his folder with a decisive movement. The Clark property remains under Ms. Clark's ownership, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. This case is dismissed. He stood, nodded to the court, and exited. For a moment, no one moved. Then came the shuffling of papers, murmured conversations, and the gradual realization that Cedar Hill's carefully orchestrated plan had collapsed. Deborah was the first to leave, pushing past neighbors without acknowledging anyone. Paul followed, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment, perhaps both. Martha lingered, seemingly unsure what to do now that the social hierarchy had been disrupted. As I gathered my documents, Eleanor approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Your grandfather would be proud, she whispered. So proud. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the Cedar Hill Gazette and even the larger county newspaper waited. Ms. Clark, what are your plans for the property now? Will you block the development entirely? I paused, considering my answer carefully. My plans are to honor my family's legacy of stewardship. The Clark property has always been available for genuine community benefit. That won't change under my ownership. But I won't allow commercial development to replace what's been preserved for generations. As the reporters jotted down my response, I noticed a small group of neighbors waiting hesitantly nearby, people who had sat on Deborah's side of the courtroom but hadn't actively participated in the campaign against me. One woman stepped forward, Karen Blackwell, who lived 3 doors down from me. Madison, we didn't know about your grandfather's history with the town, about what he did with the highway. I nodded, unsure what to say. We were told this was about progress, about what's best for Cedar Hill. She continued. I'm sorry we didn't ask more questions. Thank you, I said simply. It wasn't full reconciliation, but it was a start. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in months. The battle was won, but the war for Cedar Hill's future, and my place in it, was just beginning. I had stood my ground. I hadn't fallen. Now came the harder part, building something meaningful from this victory. The days following the court ruling rippled through Cedar Hill like a stone thrown into still water. I woke the morning after to find a spray of wildflowers on my porch. No card, no note, just a quiet acknowledgement from someone in town. By afternoon, 3 different news outlets had called requesting interviews, which I politely declined. I was shelving books in my home office when a knock came at my door. Through the peephole, I saw Martha Lewis shifting nervously on my porch, a white bakery box in her hands. I hesitated before opening the door. Martha, I said neutrally. Madison. She thrust the box toward me. Blueberry muffins, your favorite. When I didn't immediately reach for it, she added, They're not poisoned, if that's what you're thinking. Despite everything, I almost smiled. That thought hadn't occurred to me until now. Martha had the grace to look embarrassed. Look, I'm not here to apologize. Clearly. But I am here to clarify some things. She glanced around as if worried about being seen. May I come in? I stepped aside, allowing her into my living room, but not offering her a seat. Martha placed the bakery box on my coffee table and remained standing, her hands fidgeting with her purse strap. The development plan isn't dead, she said bluntly. Paul and Deborah had an emergency meeting with the mayor last night. They're looking at alternative sites. That's their prerogative, I replied. Cedar Hill needs growth. I've never disputed that. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. They're also discussing ways to make living here difficult for you. Are they planning to break the law? Nothing so direct. Zoning complaints, code enforcement inspections, social pressure. She shrugged. Deborah has influence. Why are you telling me this? I asked, genuinely curious. Martha was silent for a moment, looking around my living room at the photographs of my grandfather, the bookshelves, the evidence of a life quietly lived. My mother knew your grandfather, she finally said. She was the school nurse when he taught history at Cedar Hill High. She always said William Clark was the most honest man she'd ever met. Martha's voice softened. When I saw those pictures in court of your grandfather at that parade, I remembered. My mother took me to that parade. I was just a little girl, but I remember everyone cheering for him. I waited, sensing there was more. Deborah's been my friend for 30 years, Martha continued. She's helped me through divorce, when my bakery almost went under, when my son was arrested for that DUI. I owe her. But what happened in court yesterday? She shook her head. That wasn't right. No, I agreed. It wasn't. I'm not switching sides, Martha said firmly. I'm just creating distance. And I thought you should know they won't give up easily. After she left, I stood at my kitchen window watching her walk down my driveway, wondering what this strange, not quite olive branch meant for my future in Cedar Hill. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, my phone rang. Mayor Thompson himself. Ms. Clark? He began formally. I hope you're well after yesterday's proceedings. I am, thank, you. Good, good. Listen, the town council is holding a special session tomorrow evening. We'd like you to attend. Not as a defendant, he added quickly, but as a potential partner. Partner in what exactly? In Cedar Hill's future. The development plan needs revision, obviously, and we'd value your input. As a Clark and as a significant property owner. The change in tone was jarring. Yesterday, I had been an obstacle. Today, I was a significant property owner whose input was valued. The hypocrisy was almost amusing. I'll be there, I said, but I'll need to see the revised proposals in advance. The mayor hesitated. That's not typically how It's how we'll proceed in this case, I interrupted firmly. Email them by noon tomorrow, or I won't attend. After a moment's, silence, he agreed. The proposed revisions arrived the next morning, a digital presentation outlining a scaled-back development on the other side of town, with a much smaller footprint. The community center remained, but the commercial aspects had been significantly reduced. Most interestingly, there was a proposal for a Clark Historical Park that would preserve the legacy of one of Cedar Hill's founding families. Reading between the lines, I understood this for what it was, a public relations recovery attempt. After the court case had revealed my grandfather's contribution to saving Cedar Hill from the highway, the town leaders couldn't simply continue painting me as the villain. Instead, they would attempt to co-opt my family's legacy while pursuing their development elsewhere. I arrived at town hall that evening to find the meeting room packed. Deborah Wallace sat at the council table, her expression professionally neutral when I entered. Paul Stevens was notably absent. Mayor Thompson opened the session with practiced diplomacy. As we all know, Cedar Hill faces both opportunities and challenges in balancing growth with our historical character. Recent events have clarified certain aspects of our town's history that should be celebrated. For nearly an hour, the Council and Development Committee presented their revised vision. The new location made more sense logistically. The scaled-back commercial element was more in keeping with Cedar Hill's character. The proposed Clark Historical Park would honor a legacy of community service. When they finished, Mayor Thompson turned to me. Ms. Clark, we value your thoughts on this revised approach. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I could feel Deborah's gaze, calculating and cautious. The other council members watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to lingering resentment. I stood smoothing my skirt. The new location is sensible. The scale is more appropriate for Cedar Hill. These are improvements. I paused, letting the tentative relief spread before continuing. However, I have concerns about the proposed Clark Historical Park. Mayor Thompson's smile faltered. Concerns? We thought you'd be pleased by this recognition of your family's contributions. Recognition is appreciated when it's genuine, I replied. But this proposal feels like an attempt to appropriate my family's name without substance. Deborah leaned forward. Ms. Clark, I assure you, the town's intention is to genuinely honor. The town's intention, I interrupted quietly, was made clear in court yesterday. Now you're attempting to rewrite the narrative. Murmurs spread through the audience. I continued before anyone could interject. If Cedar Hill wants to honor my grandfather's legacy, I have a counter-proposal. I opened my folder and distributed copies of the document I'd prepared after receiving their presentation. The Clark property will remain private, but I propose establishing a true community space on 2 acres of the land. Gardens, walking paths, and a small pavilion for town gatherings. Not a commercial development, but a genuine community resource, managed jointly by a peace citizen committee and the Clark Family Trust that I'll establish. The proposal spread quickly through the room, people leaning together to read, whispered conversations breaking out. Additionally, I continued, I'll support the revised development plan at the new location, provided it maintains the current scale and includes affordable housing units alongside the market-rate apartments. Mayor Thompson scanned my proposal, his expression unreadable. This is quite detailed, Ms. Clark. I've had time to think about Cedar Hill's needs, I replied, and my family's responsibility to this community. Deborah studied me with new calculation in her eyes. Your proposal would require significant private investment. The town's budget will not be burdened, I finished for her. I've already spoken with the Cedar Hill Historical Society about grant opportunities. My proposal includes potential funding sources that won't impact the town's budget. What I didn't mention was my conversation with Eleanor that morning, where she'd connected me with 3 wealthy historical preservation advocates in the county who were eager to support alternatives to commercial development. The council recessed to discuss the proposal. While they deliberated in the back room, neighbors approached me, some apologetically, others curiously, a few still maintaining cool distance. Karen Blackwell and her husband brought me a cup of coffee. This is exactly what Cedar Hill needs, Karen said quietly. Balance. Thoughtful growth, not just development for its own sake. When the council returned, 20 minutes later, their expressions suggested they hadn't reached consensus. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat. The council appreciates Ms. Clark's thoughtful counter-proposal. We'll need time to evaluate the financial and logistical aspects, but in principle, we see merit in this approach. We propose forming a joint committee of council members and citizens, including Ms. Clark, to refine these ideas into a comprehensive plan. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was a path forward, one where I would have a voice rather than being steamrolled. I nodded my agreement. As the meeting adjourned, Deborah approached me, maintaining a careful public smile. Impressive maneuver, Madison. You've clearly been planning this. Not planning, I corrected her. Just considering alternatives. Beyond winning and losing. Her smile tightened. Don't mistake a tactical retreat for surrender. Cedar Hill still needs proper development. I agree, I said simply. We just define proper differently. As she walked away, I realized our conflict had evolved rather than ended. But now, at least, it would play out in committee meetings and public forums, rather than through whisper campaigns and legal intimidation. That night, walking home under Cedar Hill's ancient oaks, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began. Hope. Not just for my continued peaceful existence here, but for a town that might finally find a path between preservation and progress. Spring arrived in Cedar Hill with unusual vibrancy. The winter's political frost had thawed into a cautious renewal. Not friendship, exactly, but a workable coexistence. The joint committee formed after the town meeting had met weekly throughout February and March, gradually transforming my proposal and the town's revised development plan into something neither side had originally envisioned, but both could support. I was in my garden on a Saturday morning, turning soil for summer vegetables, when a familiar Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Deborah Wallace emerged, looking uncharacteristically casual in slacks and a light sweater, rather than her usual power suit. Madison, she called, approaching the garden beds. Do you have a moment? I set down my trowel and wiped my hands on my jeans. Of course. I've been driving by the Henderson property, she said, referencing the alternative development site. The preliminary ground clearing looks good. It does, I agreed. The revised development had broken ground 2 weeks earlier, scaled back but still significant for Cedar Hill's growth. Deborah hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with whatever had actually brought her here. The committee voted on the final plans for the Clark Community Garden yesterday. I know, I was there. I reminded her gently. Yes, well, she extracted a folder from her handbag. These are the final renderings. Construction can begin next month if you approve. I took the folder, curious why she was delivering this personally when an email would have sufficed. Opening it, I found beautiful architectural drawings of winding paths, garden plots, a small pavilion, and surprisingly, a central fountain. The fountain wasn't in the design we approved, I noted. Deborah looked away. I added it afterward. It's a personal contribution. The water feature will be carved from local stone, with a plaque honoring your grandfather. I studied her face, trying to understand this unexpected gesture. May I ask why? She sighed, seeming to deflate slightly. My father spoke of your grandfather. Often, you know. Not always kindly, especially after the highway controversy, but always with respect. She met my eyes directly. What you said in court about my father and William being friends once, that was true. They had a complicated relationship. Most meaningful relationships are complicated, I offered. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. Indeed. When I was a child, before the political rivalries, your grandfather taught me to fish. Did you know that? Took me to Palmer Creek one summer when my father was busy campaigning. Showed infinite patience while I tangled lines and complained about worms. The image was so unexpected that I couldn't help smiling. He taught me too. Said fishing builds character because it requires hope, patience, and accepting disappointment with grace. That sounds like him. Deborah glanced around my garden, at the home behind it. I won't apologize for supporting the development. Cedar Hill needs economic growth, and I still believe that. I know. But I will acknowledge that I personalized our conflict. Made it about old grudges rather than what was best for the town. She gestured to the folder. The fountain is my way of separating past from present. I understood what this gesture cost her. Not financially, but in pride. Deborah Wallace didn't admit mistakes, and she certainly didn't make peace offerings. This wasn't friendship, but it was something close to respect. Thank you, I said simply. The fountain will be beautiful. She nodded briskly, the vulnerable moment passing. The committee meets Tuesday to finalize the construction schedule. Paul won't be attending. Oh? This was news to me. Paul Stevens had been a combative but consistent presence at our meetings. He's withdrawn from the Cedar Hill project entirely. His company is focusing on developments in Riverbend County instead. She hesitated. There were some financial irregularities discovered in his previous proposals. Nothing criminal, but enough to raise concerns with investors. I absorbed this information, wondering if Deborah had played a role in Paul's exodus. Her next words confirmed my suspicion. Cedar Hill deserves honest partners, she said firmly, even when we disagree on methods. After Deborah left, I spent the afternoon working in my garden, processing our conversation. By evening, I'd made a decision that had been forming in my mind for weeks. Monday morning found me at Eleanor's house with a legal pad full of notes. At 85, she remained sharp as ever, though now using a cane after a winter fall. You're sure about this? She asked after I outlined my plan. It's a significant commitment. I'm sure, I replied. The Clark property should be protected beyond my lifetime. A formal land trust is the best way to ensure that. Deborah will have opinions about the trust's governance structure, Eleanor warned. I'm counting on it, I said with a smile. Her political experience will actually be valuable in creating something lasting. The next evening, I presented my land trust proposal to the committee, a legal framework that would permanently protect the Clark property from commercial development while allowing sustainable community use. The garden project would be just the beginning. Future generations would help determine how the land could best serve Cedar Hill, but the core protection would remain. This goes far beyond our current agreement, Mayor Thompson noted cautiously. It does, I acknowledged, because our current agreement only lasts until the next development. Pressure, the next council, or the next generation. This creates permanence. Debate was spirited but constructive. Surprisingly, Deborah became my strongest ally, deftly countering objections and suggesting governance refinements that strengthened the proposal. By meeting's end, we had preliminary approval to develop the trust documents with the town attorney. Leaving town hall that evening, I found Martha Lewis waiting beside my car, a travel mug in her hands. "Chamomile tea," she said, offering it to me. "You looked tired in there." "Thank you." I accepted the peace offering, our first direct interaction since her warning visit months earlier. "The bakery's providing refreshments for the garden groundbreaking next month," she said, adjusting her scarf. "No charge." I smiled. "That's generous, Martha," she shrugged. "It's good business. People will remember the muffins, not the politics." After a pause, she added, "My son's interested in one of those community garden plots. He's been sober 8 months now. Needs a hobby. We'll save him a good one," I promised, understanding this was her way of acknowledging the project's value. Throughout April, momentum built. Construction. Crews prepared the garden site. The land trust documents circulated among attorneys. Local businesses donated materials and labor, transforming what had been a contentious battle into a community point of pride. The Cedar Hill Gazette, which had once published editorials questioning my motives, now ran a front-page feature about the Clark family's historical contributions to the town, complete, with Eleanor's carefully curated photographs and documents. Not everyone was converted, of course. Some neighbors still viewed me with suspicion, and occasional whispers followed me in the grocery store. But increasingly, those voices were outnumbered by greetings, questions about the garden's progress, and even invitations to long-ignored community events. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. The evening before, I sat on my porch swing watching fireflies appear in the twilight when a truck pulled up. Karen Blackwell and her husband Tom climbed out, followed by 3 other neighbors I recognized from recent committee meetings. "Hope we're not intruding," Karen called, "but we thought you might want help setting up for tomorrow." I wasn't planning anything elaborate, I confessed. The official ceremony would be handled by the town. Tom grinned. "Well, we were thinking it shouldn't just be speeches and shovels. We brought string lights for the trees and food, and Karen's got that portable speaker system." I found myself laughing. "A party? Here?" "A neighborhood gathering," Karen corrected. "On Clark land. Seems fitting, doesn't it?" As they began unloading supplies, more cars arrived. Eleanor being helped from her daughter's sedan, Martha with trays of pastries, even the high school music teacher with 3 students carrying instrument cases. By full dark, my backyard had transformed. Lights twinkled in the trees, tables held potluck contributions, and impromptu music filled the air. Neighbors who had ignored me for months now stood in small groups on my lawn, laughing and talking. Around 8 o'clock, a hush fell as Deborah's Mercedes pulled in. She emerged looking momentarily uncertain, an unusual expression for her, before straightening her shoulders and approaching with a bottle of champagne. "I wasn't invited," she said quietly when she reached me. "Neither was I, apparently," I replied with a small smile. "It just happened." She surveyed the gathering. "Your grandfather would have approved." "Yes," I agreed. "He would." We stood in comfortable silence, 2 unlikely allies watching Cedar Hill demonstrate what community could actually mean when given the chance. Tomorrow would bring official ceremonies and new beginnings, but tonight, this spontaneous gathering on land that had nearly torn the town apart felt like the true commemoration of what we'd all learned. Not forgiveness, exactly. Cedar Hill's wounds and divisions remained too fresh for that, but something equally powerful was taking root: understanding. The recognition that progress didn't require erasing history, that community wasn't built through dominance but through mutual respect, and that the quietest voice sometimes carried the most important truth. As twilight deepened into night, with laughter and music surrounding me, I finally felt what my grandfather had tried to teach me all along. True belonging isn't granted by others' approval. It grows naturally from the ground beneath your feet when you stand firmly in your own truth. By late summer, the Clark Community Garden had transformed from architectural renderings to living reality. 26 garden plots flourished with vegetables and flowers. The pavilion hosted weekend gatherings, and Deborah's fountain created a peaceful centerpiece where children played and elders rested on shaded benches. The land trust documents had been finalized and signed, ensuring protection for generations to come. Cedar Hill itself was changing too. The development at the Henderson property was rising steadily, 3 stories of apartments above street-level shops, with the community center's foundation already completed. Mayor Thompson proudly told anyone who would listen that the project had attracted new businesses to town while maintaining Cedar Hill's character. I had settled into a new routine, dividing my time between my technical writing work, volunteer hours at the garden, and serving on the land trust board. My quiet life had become considerably less quiet, but in ways that felt meaningful rather than intrusive. On a warm August evening, I was weeding my plot when Eleanor's granddaughter Lily brought her to the garden in a wheelchair, a concession to mobility issues that Eleanor had resisted until recently. "Madison," Eleanor called, gesturing me over. "I've been going through more archives. Found something you should see." She handed me a yellowed envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping from 1970, an interview with my grandfather about Cedar Hill's future development. His words leapt off the page. "Growth isn't the enemy of preservation. Thoughtlessness is. Cedar Hill can embrace change while honoring its history, but only if we plan with both the past and future in mind. The land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land, as temporary stewards of something enduring." Reading his words so aligned with what we'd accomplished brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "He saw this coming," I said softly. "All of it." Eleanor nodded. "William understood Cedar Hill better than Cedar Hill understood itself." She patted my hand, just like his granddaughter. As twilight approached, gardeners began packing up tools and harvesting late summer vegetables. Martha's son, Jason, now 9 months sober, carefully filled a basket with tomatoes from his thriving plot. Karen Blackwell's daughters practiced cartwheels on the central lawn. The newly formed Cedar Hill Garden Club, mostly retirees, discussed fall planting schedules beneath the pavilion. This peaceful scene, community in its truest form, had emerged from conflict, not through my victory in court, but through the harder work of finding common ground afterward. I was locking the tool shed when Deborah arrived, looking uncharacteristically flustered. She wore casual clothes and no makeup, something I'd never witnessed before. "Madison, we need to talk," she said, her voice tense. "There's a situation developing." We sat at a picnic table where she pulled out her tablet and opened a series of emails. "The State Transportation Department has accelerated their highway expansion project. They're considering 3 potential routes." She pointed to a map. 2 of them would cut directly through either your property or the new development. I studied the map with growing alarm. They can't just take private property, especially land in a protected trust. "They can with eminent domain," Deborah said grimly, "if they decide the public benefit outweighs private interests." "When did you learn about this?" "This morning. As county councilwoman, I'm on the notification list." She looked genuinely troubled. "The irony isn't lost on me, Madison. After everything, history repeating itself," I murmured, thinking of how my grandfather had faced a similar threat decades ago. "Except this time, we don't have extra Clark land to offer as an alternative," Deborah noted. "The state's population growth and transportation needs are legitimate. They need viable routes between the interstate and the new tech corridor." I considered the implications. Either Cedar Hill would lose the garden and my home, or it would lose the development project that was revitalizing the town's economy. After everything we'd accomplished, the choice seemed cruel. "What does the mayor say?" I asked. "He's already organizing opposition to the route that would impact the development. His position is that the town has invested too much in that project to lose it now." Deborah met my eyes directly. "He's prepared to argue that your property is the logical alternative with minimal economic impact." The betrayal stung. After months of collaboration, the mayor would sacrifice my land without hesitation. "And your position?" I asked carefully. Deborah was silent for a moment. "Officially, I haven't taken one. Personally," she sighed, "I think both options are unacceptable. Cedar Hill shouldn't have to choose between its economic future and its historical soul." Her answer surprised me. 6 months ago, I would have expected Deborah to advocate for whatever protected the development. "Is there a third option?" I asked. "The third proposed route bypasses both properties, but would be more expensive and impact wetlands." She scrolled to another map. "Environmental groups are already mobilizing against it." I stood, needing movement to process this threat. "When will they decide?" "Public hearings start next month. Final decision by year's end." The timeline was aggressive, clearly designed to minimize opposition. We had weeks, not months, to develop a response. "We need to coordinate," I said, thinking aloud. "The garden, the historical society, the land trust board, and the development stakeholders," Deborah added. "If we appear divided, the state will simply impose their preferred solution." "Unified how?" "Our interests seem directly opposed." Deborah's expression hardened with familiar determination. "Not opposed, Madison. Different, but interconnected. Cedar Hill needs both the development and this garden, both the future and the past." She gestured around us. Haven't we already proven that apparent opposites can coexist? I recognized the political strategist emerging, the formidable woman who had once been my opponent, now potentially my strongest ally. What are you suggesting? I asked. A coalition, united opposition to both routes through Cedar Hill, and a community-developed alternative proposal. Her eyes sparked with challenge. We fought over this town's soul once. Now we fight for it. Together. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Deborah, leveraging her political connections, secured meetings with state officials. I mobilized the land trust supporters and environmental advocates. Mayor Thompson, after initial resistance, recognized that defending only the development would split the town and weaken our position. By early September, Save Cedar Hill signs appeared in yards throughout town. The coalition grew to include business owners, residents from both the historic district and newer neighborhoods, and even developers who recognized that unchecked highway expansion would transform the town's character. Our alternative proposal took shape, a modified route that would preserve both the Clark property and the development while addressing traffic needs through upgraded existing roads and a smaller new connector. It would cost more but would protect Cedar Hill's carefully balanced growth plan. The public hearing at Cedar Hill High School's auditorium drew hundreds. State transportation officials presented their 3 routes with clinical detachment, emphasizing cost efficiency and traffic projections while minimizing community impact. When public comments began, I watched with quiet pride as Cedar Hill residents, many who had once viewed me as an obstacle to progress, defended the garden and land trust with the same passion they showed for the development project. The narrative had shifted from either-or to both and, exactly what my grandfather had advocated decades earlier. My turn to speak came toward the end. Standing at the microphone, I felt the weight of Cedar Hill's past and future on my shoulders. 50 years ago, my grandfather faced a similar decision about highway expansion. He found a solution that preserved Cedar Hill's character while accommodating necessary growth. Today, we face the same challenge, but with an important difference. I looked around the auditorium, meeting familiar faces. This time, we face it as a unified community, not as competing interests. I outlined our alternative proposal, emphasizing how it honored both development needs and preservation values. Cedar Hill is not choosing between economic vitality and historical identity. We're demonstrating that thoughtful planning can achieve both. As I returned to my seat, Deborah squeezed my arm briefly, a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come from that courtroom confrontation. The transportation officials promised to review all input before making their recommendation. As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor found me in the crowd. "Your grandfather would be bursting with pride," she said, her eyes bright, "not just for defending the land, but for how you've helped heal Cedar Hill's divisions." "We haven't won yet," I reminded her. "The outcome matters," she acknowledged, "but so does the process. Look around you." I did. Throughout the auditorium, neighbors who had once been adversaries now stood in conversation. Development supporters and preservation advocates, business owners and environmentalists, newcomers and longtime residents. Cedar Hill was no longer a town divided by a property dispute, but a community united by a shared vision. That night, I sat on my porch steps looking toward the garden, its outlines visible in the moonlight. Whatever the state ultimately decided, something important had already been accomplished. Cedar Hill had rediscovered its capacity for collective action and mutual respect, qualities essential for any community facing an uncertain future. The land beneath my feet, once the source of so much conflict, had become the foundation for something my grandfather would have recognized immediately, a community worthy of the name. Winter descended on Cedar Hill with unexpected gentleness. Light snow dusting the garden's dormant beds, holiday lights reflecting in the frozen surface of Deborah's fountain. The town held its collective breath, awaiting the state's decision on the highway expansion. On the second Tuesday of December, the verdict arrived. The Transportation Department had selected a modified version of our alternative proposal, a compromise that would upgrade existing roads, add a smaller connector than originally planned, and preserve both the Clark property and the development site. The adjustments would increase costs, but, as their report acknowledged, would maintain community cohesion and honor local planning priorities. Cedar Hill celebrated with uncharacteristic unity. The Gazette's headline proclaimed, "Community Preservation Plan Prevails," with a photograph of Deborah, Mayor Thompson, and me standing together at the garden entrance. Martha's Bakery offered victory scones for a week. Even Paul Stevens, hearing the news from his new ventures in Riverbend County, sent a grudgingly congratulatory email. 3 days before Christmas, as I strung lights along my porch railing, Judge Ellery's car pulled into my driveway. I hadn't seen him since a chance encounter at the grocery store months earlier. "Ms. Clark," he called, approaching with a small package. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Your Honor. Would you like to come in? I have coffee brewing." Inside, seated at my kitchen table, the judge seemed hesitant. "I've been following Cedar Hill's highway situation. Congratulations on the outcome." "Thank you. It was truly a community effort." He nodded, turning the package in his hands before finally placing it on the table. "I'm retiring next month, moving to Arizona to be near my daughter's family." "Cedar Hill will miss your wisdom on the bench," I said sincerely. "Before leaving, I wanted to give you something." He pushed the package toward me. "From your grandfather's estate." I unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small wooden box with WC carved into the lid. Inside lay a pocket watch, tarnished with age but still beautiful, and a folded piece of paper. "When your grandfather's will was processed, this was separated from his personal effects," Judge Ellery explained. "Court administrators held it because of a specific instruction that it be delivered to you only after you had found your place in Cedar Hill. At the time, no one knew what that meant." I unfolded the paper, a brief note in my grandfather's handwriting. "Madison. This watch belonged to my father and his father before him. Each Clark has carried it while serving as steward of our land. Time moves forward, but some responsibilities remain constant. The land will teach you, as it taught me, that true strength lies not in winning battles but in creating peace where discord once ruled. When you understand this, Cedar Hill will truly be your home. With love and faith in you, Grandpa William." I traced the words with my finger, memories of my grandfather flooding back. His patience, his quiet wisdom, his absolute confidence that doing right mattered more than being right. "He knew," I said softly. Somehow, he anticipated everything. The development pressure, the conflict, even the resolution. Judge Ellery smiled. "William Clark understood human nature, and he understood you." He rose to leave. "I should have given this to you months ago after the court case, but something told me to wait. I'm glad I did. You've done more than defend your property, Ms. Clark. You've helped transform Cedar Hill." After he left, I sat holding the watch, feeling its weight, the physical embodiment of my inheritance, not just of land, but of values. My grandfather had prepared me for this role long before I understood what it would entail. The new year brought fresh beginnings. Construction resumed on the development with slight modifications to accommodate the revised highway plan. The garden lay dormant under snow, waiting for spring. The Land Trust Board met monthly, planning educational programs and community events for the coming year. In February, Deborah surprised everyone by announcing she wouldn't seek re-election to the county council. 20 years is enough, she told the Gazette. Cedar Hill needs new voices and perspectives. What she didn't publicly share, but told me privately, was her plan to establish a historical preservation foundation focused on balancing development with community character throughout the county. "Your grandfather's vision shouldn't be limited to Cedar Hill," she explained over coffee at Martha's Bakery, now our regular meeting spot. "Other communities are facing the same pressures, the same choices. You're becoming a preservationist," I teased. "Who would have thought?" She laughed. "I prefer balanced development advocate." "And speaking of balance," she continued, sliding a folder across the table, "the development company wants to name the central plaza at the new community center Clark Commons. They need your permission." The name startled me, identical to the designation on that 1887 map, showing my family's original land grant. "How did they know that name?" "They didn't," Deborah replied with a small smile. "I suggested it. Seemed fitting, given the history. And the present." The gesture moved me deeply. "Thank you, Deborah. Don't thank me. It's good politics and good business." Her expression softened slightly, and perhaps a small atonement for past mistakes. By April, the garden awakened with new growth. The Saturday volunteer days that had begun with a handful of participants now regularly drew 30 or more Cedar Hill residents. Children planted sunflowers along the fence line. Retirees maintained the herb garden. Families tended individual plots. One bright morning, as I supervised the season's first children's gardening class, Eleanor arrived, still in her wheelchair but looking stronger than during winter's depths. "Quite the transformation," she observed, watching children fill watering cans at the fountain. "From battleground to playground in less than a year." "From division to community," I agreed. "Cedar Hill needed this," Eleanor said, her historian's perspective evident in her tone. Not just the garden or the development, but the process of finding common ground. Towns either grow together or grow apart. She reached for my hand. Your grandfather once told me that land carries memory, that the experiences we imprint on a place linger in subtle ways. She gazed around the garden. These children will grow up remembering this place not as the site of Cedar Hill's great property dispute, but as where they learn to grow tomatoes and make friends. That's a powerful legacy, Madison. As spring advanced into summer, Cedar Hill settled into a new equilibrium. The development welcomed its first commercial, tenants, and apartment residents. The community center neared completion, its Clark Commons Plaza already hosting weekend markets. My own life found balance between privacy and community involvement, solitude and connection. On the anniversary of the court hearing, I organized a small gathering in the garden pavilion, not to commemorate victory, but to celebrate transformation. Eleanor came along, with Martha, Karen, and her family, Mayor Thompson, and others who had played roles in Cedar Hill's evolution. Deborah arrived last, carrying a bronze plaque. For the fountain, she explained, if you approve. The plaque read, Clark Community Garden, established 2025. Growth isn't the enemy of preservation, thoughtlessness is. William Clark, 1970. My grandfather's words, preserved in bronze, brought our journey full circle. His wisdom had guided us through conflict to cooperation, from antagonism to mutual respect. As twilight gathered, with lightning bugs beginning to flicker around the garden's edges, I stood among neighbors who had become something more, not quite friends in every case, but fellow travelers on a shared journey. The pocket watch rested in my pocket, a tangible connection to those who had come before me. Martha raised her glass. To Cedar Hill, past, present, and future. To Cedar Hill, we echoed, our voices blending in the summer evening. Later, walking home beneath the stars, I remembered the day I'd stood in that courtroom, facing what seemed an insurmountable wall of opposition. The journey from that moment to this one hadn't been easy or straightforward. It had required standing firm when necessary, compromising when possible, and recognizing that true victory lay not in defeating others, but in finding solutions where everyone could maintain their dignity. My grandfather's letter had said the land would teach me. He was right. Through conflict and resolution, through seasons of discord and harmony, the land had shown me that communities, like gardens, require both deep roots and capacity for growth. That preservation without adaptation leads to stagnation, while change without respect for history destroys the very foundation it builds upon. On my porch, I paused to look back toward the garden, now visible only as a darker silhouette against the night sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations between competing visions of what Cedar Hill should become. The work of community never truly ends. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, I finally understood what my grandfather had meant in his letter. True strength isn't found in shouting louder than your enemies. It's found in standing steady when they expect you to fall, and then, when the moment is right, in extending a hand to transform adversaries into allies. The quiet woman they had once mocked had found her voice, not in victory's shout, but in the more powerful whisper of truth. And Cedar Hill, once divided by that truth, had ultimately been unified by it.